Hello and welcome to the FSF podcast. I am Tim. I am your host. And just as a reminder, this is a show made by nerds for nerds. Now, tonight we're not in the nerdatorium because Mother Nature has decided to play a cruel and nasty joke on Michigan. And, well, the weather sucks. So I'm home because the roads suck as well. So we are not in the nerdatorium tonight, but you can pretend like there's all kinds of nerd stuff behind me. Anyway, our guest tonight is a well-established comic artist that we met at the Grand Rapids Comic-Con this year in November of 2024. He has drawn for universes like Bionicle, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Last Ronin. He has drawn for Kiss, G.I. Joe, Superman, X-Files. I could literally keep going for quite a while. There's quite a bit he's done. So I am very excited to welcome Stuart Sayger to the FSF podcast. Welcome to the show, Stuart.
How are you? Thanks so much for having me.
I am doing fun. Well. Yeah. Other than the weather, I'm in a great mood. So,
you know what? You say other than the weather, you're in a good mood. You're doing fine. The weather will change.
Yeah, I can't do anything about that. But I'm at home. I got my wood stove going. I have a nice cup of water to drink. I'm in a happy mood. So, can't really complain too greatly. All right. So, Stuart, I one of the things that we always like to do to start the show we always like to talk about how people got started, because I'm the type of person, I like to know what makes people tick, why they do what they do, why they got involved in becoming the person that I'm talking to on the other end of this call. So in your origin story, from things that I had read online, and I understand that you did not go to art school, that you're kind of self-taught, self-trained. So I'm curious, how did you get here? What were your inspirations? What helped you to decide that being an artist is what you needed to be?
I always kind of feel like this question sort of, for some people, and I think I'm one of these people, you can sort of stand back and look at somebody's life. And if you stand back far enough, everything looks like it falls into a nice little straight line. You pick and choose the moments to make the narrative. But in my case, I kind of feel like I turned into probably the only thing I was going to turn into. My parents were antique dealers who specializes in lamps and lighting. Both of my parents loved art. They know how to draw. I grew up working in a comic book store, got the job in 1986 when I was 13, typed up a little resume, and I worked there through junior high, high school, and college. I drew for my college newspaper, my high school newspaper. I knew everything about how to sell comics and make comics. Really from experience, not necessarily from education. I remember I'd made sample pages trying to break into the comic book industry, and always got nice comments and criticisms from editors. But even though people said they liked my work, they didn't hire you. Nobody wanted to be the first guy to stick their neck out and give you that job where when I missed the deadline, they get fired. So what I did was I decided to, rather than make sample pages after only about a year of doing that, I said, you know how to make a comic book, just make one. So I wrote, drew, lettered, published a self-created comic book called Shiver in the Dark. I actually bought a table at the Wizard World for 2001. I was at the show in 2000 with sample pages and decided, you know what, just come back next year with the book. So I came back from the show 2000, had the phone number. Back then you just called everybody, and bought a table to publish my then non-existent comic book. I literally hung up the phone and said, okay, I've got a table. Now I have a year to figure out what I'm going to put in it. But I had several ideas for stories that had been kicking around through high school and college. I mean, everybody I know who likes this stuff. And I mean, just about everybody. If you collect this stuff at one time or another, you had an idea for a story or you drew pictures of your own. And so I just, really focused on a few I liked, boiled them down into one cohesive idea, showed up at the show the next year with a comic book, and just sat down at the table. And it went from, on Thursday, I was a guy picking stuff up from the printer, to Friday, I was a guy signing copies of it. I mean, people always say, how do you break in? Well, some of it is, the question is a bit of a trap, because it sort of seems that somebody has to let you in. But realistically, I mean, I tell people, I said, if you want to sell comics and make comics, all you have to do is, get the book made, which is not that hard to do in the digital world, and then buy a table someplace and sit down. However, what degree of success you have, well, that's another story. But to be honest, to get that first book made and get in that chair and get at that table, that's more than 90% the trick.
Okay.
Yeah. But here's the funny thing. I used to say this and felt like a jerk saying it, but the older I'm getting, the more and more I think it should be mentioned. I really, really like art. I mean, I am self-taught, but I studied art history in college, and to this day, I still really enjoy art history.
Okay.
I went to the Indianapolis Art Museum last week just because I wanted to see, all the old favorites. I love Anthony van Dyck. He's my favorite painter. He's a Flemish painter from 1620. Painted all the famous portraits of Charles the First.
Okay.
As I said, my parents are antique dealers, so I can look at the cereal box and my wife will get annoyed because I'll say, "Look at that weird font they used." Look at how that A and the Y don't go together very well. They should have chosen other letters. When you think like that all the time and you find it entertaining, why wouldn't you be an artist for a living?
Fair. Okay, so let me ask you this, because this just popped in my head, because a few weeks back I was able to sit down with Arvell Jones, and
he's good.
Yeah, and had a really great conversation with Arvell. But he had talked about how, back in the day when he was getting started, that it meant the most to him that he was getting feedback from some of the big names at Marvel and DC about his work. For you, what was the biggest indication for you? You said you had talked with a few people that, they all liked your stuff, but what was the biggest indication for you that you could do this, that this was something I could turn this into a career. I could make this happen.
So I really like his answer, but mine is the opposite, or the other end of the spectrum, in that my father was a self-employed antique dealer, and my sister's self-employed. She owns a vintage clothing store in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm essentially self-employed in that, yes, I've done work for, whatever, this Joker, this Vampirilla, all these comic books I'm looking at here. Mm-hmm. But really, those are all jobs that you don't get hired to work at DC or Marvel and say, here's your contract, you're an artist. What you have is, hey, would you like to do 4 issues of Wolverine or something? And then you're constantly looking for your next job. So you have to manage yourself. So for me, my thing was, what I had to do was I had to make a living. Mm-hmm. I didn't necessarily have to make, wonderful art or have a great story or have great anything. I need to find a way to where all of it would line up and I could pay the bills. And so in a way that gave me an incredible freedom, because I didn't feel like that I had to be a Marvel artist or a Batman artist or any particular type of artist. Maybe there was a comic fan out there that was underserved. And I felt that because I knew how to make comics on my own, I had this background in journalism and I had this sort of wherewithal to how to be self-employed. I didn't feel like, this leads back to what I say about breaking in. You can just sort of do it on your own. So the first thing that really happened was I remember going to some shows and finally, making some money, right? You're smart enough. You treat it like a business. What did my printing cost? What was my travel? What was my room? What are other artists getting paid for commissions, right? You sort of figure out where you fit in that pecking order. Sure. I will tell you this, if you want a more satisfying answer, two things that happened the first show I ever did was 2001 when I self-published that comic book. I decided that I would draw a very quick head sketch on the cover of the book if anybody bought it. Okay? Nobody knows me. Nobody knows if the book is any good. Nobody has the time to read it. The only selling point I have right there is the art good enough that somebody wants to take a shot on me? And I said, hey, if you buy the book, I'll give you a quick profile on the cover. So on Saturday, I remember I was drawing them as quickly as I could, and I had 3 people waiting to get theirs, and a 4th was pulling out his wallet. And I thought, I am the bottleneck. When you are the thing that is keeping you from getting ahead because you can't work fast enough, that's a good problem to have. So that felt great. But the other thing that really was nice, that really was that idea of, keep going and broaden your horizons, was that same day. This was just blind luck, but my table at that Wizard show happened to be set up cat-a-corner from Diamond. And I had self-published this comic book. I was really hoping that I would sell some copies, see where it took things, see if maybe some editors liked it, maybe to get hired. And what happened was the Diamond booth saw that I was selling it well. And I'm probably not supposed to say this, but they came over to me and they just, during a quiet part of the show, they said, I don't think we've even seen this book. Did you even submit this to us? And I said, I just came out. I'm independent. I didn't think you'd have that much interest. And they said, well, we can't carry everything, but we've watched you sell it all day. If you can sell it this well, here, you should submit it. We'd like to carry it. And that was real encouragement because Diamond's there to make money, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I really feel that they were and are actually very sympathetic to independent creators. Everybody's got an opinion on them, but they carried lots of books that if you were an independent publisher, you could call up lots of other distributors and they would say, sorry, we're not doing this. Diamond gave lots of people their first shot and they picked up my book. And so immediately I finished that show and I only printed 1,000 copies. And because I was going to go through Diamond, I had to immediately reprint it. But it also meant that my little business model had to grow immediately, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, yeah, you can have Diamond carry it, but have you thought about how you're going to advertise it? Have you thought about how you're going to ship it? Have you thought about, is there anything you learned from this one event launching this book that you might alter for when you reprint it? That was pretty encouraging because they could look at it and say, it's selling. We have an idea what sells. Let's sell it.
Oh, that's cool. Having grown up with a self-employed father, my dad still works. He's still self-employed. And so, I get that mindset of looking at things like a business because I was self-employed for 15, 16 years. And, I just recently went back to work for somebody else.
Right.
But yeah, so I get that mindset of, okay, I have to, treat this as a business and this is my expense for this and this is my expense for that. And, and trying to figure all those things out. So that really does register with me. And that makes an awful lot of sense. But yeah,
I'll tell you this, 2 other things happened there that were tricky. There was a pretty good pretty good sized comic book retailer that, because I grew up working in a comic book store in Indianapolis, the store owner knew several other people and he knew someone who sold an awful lot of comics on the road. And he said, this retailer, I think, will carry some of your books. And that retailer, who I'm not going to name, looked at it and he said he was much older and he read the lead character was like an 18-year-old. And he said, I don't think an 18-year-old would do this. Now, at the time, I was about 28 that I made this comic book. I was closer to 18, okay?
Right.
And I said, tell me why. And it had to do with how someone with a lot of money might spend their money. And I thought, yeah, I don't think you sort of understand this sort of this movement towards sort of DIY thrift store fashion world had sort of taken off. And it was one of these weird things where I thought, here's this person who has sold an awful lot of comic books and knows what sells is telling me something they thought wasn't right in my book. And I had to have the guts to either accept that or reject it. I made T-shirts early in my career and everybody said, for my comic book, and everybody said, here's what you do. You make a lot of larges, a lot of extra larges, and you don't make any smaller mediums. And I said, I don't think that's true. And I think I'm going to sell the girls really well. So I made more smalls than anything else. Again, my sister ran a vintage clothing shop, right? And I was younger, and I thought I knew the market. So even though everybody told me to get large and extra large, I ordered more smalls, and I sold out of them. It was the size I sold out of first, but it was what I ordered the most of.
Absolutely.
And that sounds kind of dumb, but that is where you sort of manage all this as a business.
Yeah. Oh, no, that all makes sense to me. Yeah, and you got to have something. You got your fingers on the pulse of different things, and you're able to just see how different environments are treating different things, and that helps you informs your decision on how to proceed. And well, you have to have a little bit of faith in yourself, which is what you showed.
And I also, when the comic book came out, there were no horror comics being made. And that was the thing. So It was pre 30 Days of Night. It was pre Walking Dead. I remember people came to my table. Many people picked it up and they said, is this a horror book? And I said, yes. And this is usually how the conversation went. They would say, what's this about? And then I'd say, okay, well, here's what it's about. And they'd say, you know what? I don't care. I can't find any horror books. I want it. You can still tell me, but I'm buying it.
Right.
And so that right there told me, okay, this is an underserved group. So I was fortunate that, I did something I liked, but the timing was right too.
No, that's great. Yeah. I think, even for my own taste and things that I've come across over the last couple of years, I've even decided that the horror genre for me is something that's been underserved because, or underviewed, underutilized, however you want to put it, because it's something I just, didn't really appreciate. But the more I've talked with actors and actresses in the horror genre and writers and things like that, I've started to appreciate it and look at different nuances of it. So I can see how people, A, become fans of the genre, and B, would go looking for it. So that would make sense, especially at that time, if there was nothing else out there for them to go, hey, I want to read that.
There should have been something. This is the thing. I mean, it's a genre that's always alive, but comic books at that moment had such a juggernaut roll through the 90s of just really straight superheroes. I mean, it's really hard to overlook the impact. I mean, look, many superhero comics are really horror comics. They're really horror. Spawn is horror. Swamp Thing is horror. A lot of Batman really should be horror. I always find that really good horror is always psychological horror. My favorite horror is sort of when you have horror of yourself. When you think that you could be Frankenstein and unleash this monster on the world. And I don't mean the monster, I mean the Dr. Frankenstein, that you have done something horrible.
Right. Yeah.
That ties into really how Batman should feel about himself, with self-examination all the time. I mean, Batman does these days, some
wild stuff.
Yeah, and really does so through the guise of judge, jury, and executioner. He's kind of unbridled. And I would think from time to time he might just say, I'm on the edge. Am I doing the right thing? To me, that's what horror is. So I get asked to draw horror pretty regularly, and a lot of times if people talk about horror, it kind of means sort of blood and violence. And to me, it's not. It's it's if you've ever looked at yourself in the mirror and realized, I'm going to be able to break the rules or cheat or get away with it, and I'm going to, and you think, I might not be such a good person. That's my favorite horror.
For me, one of the things I didn't realize in all these years, I was like, oh, I don't like horror. I don't like horror. I don't want to watch horror movies. But I was like, man, I really like the psychological thriller.
That's where I am. Exactly. 100%.
And because I'm not much I don't care much for the blood and guts and the slashing and all that stuff. But you set me down in front of a good psychological thriller, something I really have to pay attention to, something I've got to examine the story, and it makes me think about myself and human society afterwards. That to me is a really good story. And in my interview of Dee Wallace, Scream Queen, we were talking about this, and she talked about how, really one of the things that she loves about the horror genre, and people sometimes don't give it enough credit for, is the ability to test your own fight or flight. And really to bolster that up and to help you emotionally and psychologically deal with things as things come up in your life, because you've kind of tested it with this movie or this book or whatever. And then when something happened in real life, you were able to, at least navigate it a little bit better, because you've tested your fight or flight over here. So it's not as big of a shock over here,
I'm with you on that. I mean, I when you can recognize something, right, or when something's not quite right, sometimes you recognize a situation, you say, oh, this could be really bad, and it's fine. I'll tell you a story that my dad told me about one time, and he had the opportunity to buy a really nice brass bed. Okay. In the time in the late 70s, brass beds were a really, really hot thing. And these two fellows who didn't know came to the shop, and he said, we were cleaning out this barn. We're going to tear it down. We found this great brass bed in it. Is it worth anything? Do you want to buy it? And they described it to my dad. And he said, yeah, I'd love to come see it. So he took them out in the middle of nowhere and walked between these two buildings with two gentlemen he didn't know, one in front of him and one behind him. And he realized that he had gotten himself in a situation where he doesn't know these people. Is there really going to be a brass bed? Is he maybe in a very dangerous situation?
Oh, absolutely.
And he said, yeah, right. I mean, that could be how you get robbed. And he said he walked in to this small little sort of barn area and turned the corner and glanced over, and he said it was the most gorgeous looking brass bed leaning up against the wall. And he said, I've never been so happy to see a brass bed in my life. but that, right. So right there, that's horror.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
That's every step. I mean, he doesn't want to be rude and say, fellas, I'm suddenly unnerved by this, or I think something bad's going to happen. But even he's told me, he said, I was young and I shouldn't have done that. I mean, he put himself in a potentially dangerous situation, but
Pretty serious. Yeah.
the world's filled with them. And it's the examination of that, right? As he described that, I thought to myself, yeah, what would I do in that situation? You know, by the way, he bought the brass bed. So there you go.
It's a story with a happy ending. Gotta love it.
Yeah.
All right, Stuart. So in the introduction of you, I mentioned a lot of the things that you've worked on over the years, all these different, there's some pretty major IPs that you've had. Yeah, you've had a hand in. But so is there one of those universes or a character in a universe that you felt an attachment to that made it easier for you to draw them or to be able to work with them because of an attachment you had?
I usually find, I think when comic book artists get asked questions like that and then they say something like, I think it's the opposite. They sound like smart aleck jerks, and I'm not trying to be that.
Sure.
But in my case, I honestly find, so I grew up a Batman fan. He's over my shoulder here. This is one I drew. And I've been fortunate enough to do some Batman work for Warner Brothers. I did a cover for a Joker comic book for them. This is mine. You can see past the
I saw that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. But, you know, I've been drawing him since I was 5 years old. I mean, I really have some pretty strong opinions for what he should be and how he should be done. And there are times when you've got a character that has had that much history, you kind of say, well, where's a little crack? Where's a niche I can fill in it? Okay. I feel like there are sometimes your knowledge and understanding of the character, that depth can get in the way. You feel a little bit pressure to sort of live up to something. I think John Byrne in an interview one time said something to the extent of like he couldn't believe he was working on Fantastic Four and his books weren't real, because real Marvel comics are Lee Ditko and Kirby. Okay. I can relate to that, and I can see how that would get in the way. I actually find the things I'm best at are ones that I don't have as much connection to. I can sort of look at it. I'm not wildly in love with it, but I just start, you know, pulling and pushing on it, seeing what it turns into. Bionicle was a job this over my other shoulder that I did for Lego. And in some regards, it was one of my very early jobs, but in some regards, I consider it one of my more successful endeavors, in that I really challenged what I think the look and feel of the toys had been. Lego gave me more freedom on my series than they did anyone else who probably they ever hired on any of their toy line. I mean, I could have these toys bend and twist in ways that the characters don't actually, the toys don't actually do. I allowed them to get dirty. I allowed them to break. I allowed them to, you know, have expressions. And when you talk to Lego fans, Bionicle fans after the fact, and this really is a good litmus test, I am often their favorite Bionicle artist or their least favorite, one or the other. And it means you've done something. If people respond to you that strongly, for the people who don't like it, it's offset by people who like it that much more because it's that different and that unique. So that having that response is nice. The other end of the coin is Batman, right? Everybody's read Batman. He's been around for forever. We've had some really great iconic Batmans. You know, who's the greatest Batman artist? Well, for some people, they're going to tell you it's Neil Adams. For some people, it's going to tell you it's Mike Parobeck. Somebody might tell you that it's Jim Lee right now. These are all valid answers. A lot of the people who would give any of those three answers would nod their head respectfully at the other two, but that wouldn't be their favorite. And what that means is we don't have a definitive Batman, but we have people who are deeply invested in it, and they have their favorite. And so if you can do something with that character that doesn't betray those people who've come before you, well done. If you can do something that expands beyond what those people who came before you that they accept, even better. And that's hard to do. So I
get that.
Yeah, there's some things I'd like to do for Batman. We'll see if I ever get the opportunity, because much like Lego, some people might love him and some people might hate him.
Fair enough. That makes sense to me. All right. So, but like when you have drawn for Batman and the things that you've done, because of that lifelong attachment, do you find yourself being a little more overly critical of your work for that series? Because you have like you said, in your mind, you have things that you want to see him do. So do you, when you're drawing it, do you go, oh man, I should have done it like this, or I should have done it like that, because this is how your mind sees Batman?
I usually don't have that too much personally. I think it's a good question. I might have it with another character. I don't think I'd have it with Batman. I've pretty much decided what I thought Batman should be since I was about 5, and it's never really wavered. Dark Knight Returns comes out when I'm about 13, and it's a big hit. And I was working in the comic shop when it came out. And Dark Knight is awesome. Dark Knight is not my Batman. When Dark Knight came out, I knew Dark Knight was off. I grew up an Adams, Jim Aparo, Bob Haney fan. And so I could recognize the validity of Dark Knight, but it didn't ring true for me. And I have the same thing with Michael Keaton Batman movie. It was exciting to be around, but you know, Len Wein writing some, Batman in the Rain story in 1972, and with more of an Adams Giordano look was going to be my baseline. So I always had the attitude, it's like whatever it feels internally on Batman, when I draw it, I know when it's right and I know when it's not. And with that one character, I know him so well. If there's an outside influence, it's an editor saying this is what I want, and then I'm, you're the general. I'm going to march in your direction. But I don't have much problem disagreeing with it. Other characters maybe, but he's different. For me, he really is different. When I draw Robin, here you go. When I draw Robin, I draw Burt Ward. I mean, that's what Robin looks like to me. I might draw it in sort of a Giordano-y Adams kind of comic book approach, but that was a character that I knew intimately when I was about 4 or 5, and that stuff sometimes just doesn't let go. If I developed an opinion of it later, maybe, but when it's that young, that's
an imprint.
Yeah, right. Perfect word.
Absolutely, that's an imprint. I get that. Okay, so I know that you're busy as an artist. I know that you go around to do a lot of shows, and creativity can be draining. It can be hard to stay on a creative edge, especially if you've been at it for a while. So how do you personally recharge in between sessions to keep your creative juices flowing, so to speak?
I should have a really good answer for this, and I don't have one. I've not had, it's been so long since I've had this wall, and I've seen people have it. I would be more than delighted to have an hours-long discussion on this topic, because I've seen other people wrestle with it. And one of the things that is related to it that isn't the same thing is I've seen a lot of artists work on their craft and they plateau. And I really, honestly, I've been through 1 or 2 of them, and I didn't know what they were. But you can be chasing something and get to where you're only so good and you're not getting any better. It's just kind of like, it's almost like an athlete. You're like, whatever, you're able to jump 30 inches and you're going to do all the training to get it up to 31. And you're not getting to 31. And maybe you can't get there. And so maybe the thing you have to do is you have to say, this is as high as I'm going to jump. The thing I have to do is figure out how to run faster. And that's how this will stay fresh for me. And the reason why I describe it that way is I've seen people who, they have their idea. I was in the right age where a lot of people wanted to draw like John Byrne. And John Byrne, he's a very good artist. His layouts are really good. I mean, his layouts are balanced so well sometimes just off instinct that, clearly he's a master. But if you were young and you said, I want to draw like John Byrne, and you just learned some of the tricks of the veneer, not the stuff that makes him an accomplished artist, but if you said, I want to learn that John Byrne lip glint, I want to learn how to draw an eye like John Byrne, there's some shortcut stuff that you could learn, and it would be very satisfying. And you said, I'm going to learn to draw like John Byrne. At some point, you're probably never going to get to draw like John Byrne, because only John Byrne can.
Right.
And even though you're putting more work into it, there's a point where you have diminishing returns. And some people get within 90% of it. Some people only get within 70, and they're pedaling harder and they can't break through. And so I see a lot of people get discouraged there. I had that happen to me in my 20s, and that was when I had my greatest creative breakthrough. And that what happened was I was trying to always draw on this sort of clean, DC-based 70s Giordano inks, Neil Adams-y kind of thing. And at some point, I was getting diminishing returns on my effort, and it didn't seem like there were new adventures in it. And my problem was I had just focused too small. What I did was I just looked left or right, and I remember I picked up an issue of Vampirilla, and I saw Esteban Morado's work in the 70s, and he had done a lot of really free-formed work where he didn't have hard outlines on things, or maybe there'd be a silhouette, but it'd be in white instead of black, or maybe one side of a guy's face is so illuminated that only this side has shadows, and this is flat white. He did lots of design things that I had never done, and I thought I should do some of that, and it was just like, it was such a breath of fresh air. And I'd almost always my entire life drawn out of my head. Nothing is more joyless than using reference. I really believe that. A good friend of mine is a comic book artist who drew a lot of Avengers, named Bob Hall. You probably know his name. I think about this every week. I ask Bob Hall what title he uses to introduce himself when he meets people and they don't know what he does professionally. And he said, "I'm a cartoonist." And you think about his art style as sort of a nice, great Marvel house style, sort of kind of Buscema-like. You'd say cartoonist isn't, I hear cartoonist, I think of something like Garfield or Charles Schultz. Right? Sure. And I said, "So why did you pick cartoonist? What does cartoonist mean to you?" And he said, a cartoonist is someone who draws without reference. And I'd never heard anybody identify that as a different standalone thing. And I think that when he said that, that was such a moment for me. And this only happened a couple of years ago. I thought, oh, that's brilliant. Because when I really enjoy drawing, I love drawing and writing out of my head. And the pen just can't move as quickly as I can think of it. So I don't run into a writer's block. And I often feel like I have boundless freedom because I'll use any media. And if I'm also willing to write, the world is bigger than there are more books than I'm able to read in my life, is how making art feels. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, I get that.
But going back to it, one of the most, cause I don't think this should be overlooked. One of the most frustrating, amazing things I've seen. And I've lived long enough and I've seen enough young artists. They've shown me their portfolio and you can see them. They look hurt because you understand and you say, you've hit a plateau. I know what happened. You're not getting any better. You're working really hard. You've gotten to this extent. There's a lot of nice things you're doing, and you're just trying to, it's like you're baking a cake. You've baked it 100 times, and you're trying to make the perfect cake. And what I really usually say is, you got to stop making a cake. You need to move on to making an omelet because you're plateaued. You're not getting any better. You've gotten as good as you can with these techniques and these subjects and these skills, and you're grinding yourself down. And I feel bad because I've seen a lot of friends have that happen to them. It can happen to writers. It can happen to actors. It can happen to athletes.
No, I think that's a great answer, honestly. And honestly, I think the first time we've ever had it brought up from that perspective. So, and I like that because I think that's something that I don't think it's not even exclusive to those type of genres of work. I think that can be applied to anything. Because I know that we had a plateau here a couple times on this show, where I felt like we were just,
I've done this show.
Yeah, I've done this before. I've been here before. I wasn't having fun, and for me, when I'm doing things, when I do this, it's because I do this because I like to talk to people and I like to have fun doing it. But we had a point probably in our pre-100 episodes where I was just kind of like, yeah, I don't know. This just isn't. Something wasn't stirring the Kool-Aid, and it just we had to change a few things up, and after the change, I was like, okay, that's better. This is better. I felt like I could breathe and I could do things, and we just these little tweaks over time, and we just made a few more tweaks because again, I was getting to that point of feeling like okay, we're paddling, we're our feet are moving really fast under the water, but we're not going anywhere. We're not doing anything.
I think we have so many things like this in life. Have you ever dated somebody who lived a little further away than you wanted to drive?
My wife. Yeah.
Okay. So if you like them, it's not too far to drive. If you want to spend time with them, it's not too far. Right. That's just kind of how this is. One of the things I actually enjoy reading, and there's not a lot of it that I find that's new, that's really good, but I do like reading art criticism.
Okay.
And I find it interesting when you can get really good art criticism, particularly on things that don't get a lot of art criticism or might be very hard to define or nail down. Something that I've kind of enjoyed reading art criticism on is kitsch. We know what kitsch is, but you know, what's a good definition of kitsch? Kitsch is almost one of the things where we sort of say, that's kitsch. I see it in front of me. Well, how do you describe it to somebody? What is a definition for it? And I remember there was one book I was reading about it where somebody defined it. They came up with a definition, and this one cuts deep. I love this. He said, and I wish I remember who said this. He said, kitsch is when artist A is known for producing object B does exactly that. Right? It may be a little bit unfair, but there's some insight to that. And what I thought that meant is I started thinking, well, what are examples of that? And I thought, this is why you have a band, right? Let's say it's Journey, and Journey puts out a new album. And they say, yeah, we know you made a new album. Would you play Don't Stop Believin'? And they think, yeah, I've done that. And it's a great song, and I'm not denying that, but I've done that, right, and I have nothing to gain from it. And if you ask me to play that now, it kind of is kitsch. And so,
yeah, I get that, yeah.
Right. So this is where comics, unfortunately, we got to be really careful. We got a lot of kitschy stuff going on there. Batman gritting his teeth on a gargoyle while it's raining in front of a full moon might be pretty kitschy these days.
Yeah.
You know, now, can you do it and have it be fresh? Of course you can, but that's the challenge. If you sit down and you feel like you've done it, or if somebody asks you for that and you're like, okay, well, it's paint by numbers. There it is. Well, then you made a piece of kitsch and probably not a very good piece of art. I think Jim Lee, I'm name dropper. I don't know Jim Lee. I've never met him, but I think he has a quote where somebody asked him, what's the hardest part of drawing Batman? And he said, coming up with a new pose. Now, I have heard some people say, you know what? You shouldn't feel that way. If that character is not interesting enough for you to be able to do that, then you're working on the wrong thing. That might be valid too.
No, yeah.
Sorry, no, Jim, you're great artist. He has drawn Batman a lot.
Yes, he has. Yeah. Well, I can see that though. You know, you've done the same thing for so long, and you've drawn him in position A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You know how many times? Well, what does position H look like, and how do I get there? Because you've done all these other ones. You know,
think of it as the think of it as from the fan's point of view. Like, I've gone to a restaurant I really like, and I know that whatever, platter 7 is my favorite thing on the menu. I'm happy to just have platter 7 again. And there's a joy of that. Sure. But at some point, if you want to grow as a connoisseur of food, you have to eat other things. You know, the Batman stories, we've seen him beat the Joker a lot of times. Are there new adventures for Batman to have with the Joker? Absolutely. But they have to be new adventures.
That's so, the best way that I can relate to all that is I'm a massive Star Wars fan. And to me, Star Wars is life. It's one of those things. We were talking about imprints earlier. For you as Batman and, Burt Ward and, as Robin rather. All these different things. For me, imprint very young in my life was Star Wars. And so, like, I love Star Wars, but a lot of the stuff that I've seen, well, that's okay. Well, that movie's like this movie. Okay, I like this series. Like right now, the Skeleton Crew is out, and it's just been released. And I've been watching it, absolutely loving it, because it's not the same cookie cutter Star Wars that I've watched 10 other times. And it's a new story from a new perspective with new characters and new places and areas that can be explored. But I've also liked it in the, I know the sequel trilogy doesn't get a lot of good press out there these days, but there are also things about the sequel trilogy I like because of the way that they did use some of the characters that, you have these new stories, but you have some of the old characters brought in and, different ways of using them. And it was something different. It was something fresh. So, some are going to like it, some are not.
The fans know. This is the thing that doesn't get talked about in this industry enough. And believe me, if you know what the fans are going to feel like or what their reaction is going to be, you're the $1 million man. Sure. X-Men had been a giant hit for Marvel for a long, long time. And DC Comics had been working their tail off to try to figure out something they could match X-Men. They did okay with Teen Titans, but it lost its steam, and they wanted something. And while the whole world was trying to do something to catch up with Marvel's X-Men, Rob Liefeld went to Image and made Youngblood, and I worked in a comic shop the day that came out, and I saw 9-year-olds look at Youngblood next to X-Men, and they had $2 in their hands, and they could buy one or the other, and they bought Youngblood. Sure. Now, if anybody knows how to make a comic that is an X-Men comic that beats the X-Men, it ought to be Rob Liefeld. Well, he did it. And this is the thing. Did anybody know that that book was going to be the success it was? Nobody knew what Image was going to be. But the fans felt it, and they knew it. And you can't trick them. I mean, it's kind of what we're talking about when you draw Batman. I can draw a fresh Batman that's very different, and some people will look at it and say, this isn't the Batman I like. Sort of like I looked at Frank Miller and they say, but you're on to something here. Right. This is valid. This is good. But also try to lie to them or cheat them.
They'll know.
They'll see right through you. Yep.
Oh, sure.
And
sure.
Without naming names, that's why some of the media we've gotten of late has had such criticism. How's that?
Fair enough.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. All right. So I also, we started off this interview talking about how I like to know what makes people tick and why they do what they do. But throughout this process of some 400 odd interviews I've done over the years, one of the things I've really discovered, and I enjoy in the discovery of people, is that people aren't always just one thing. You're not just Stuart Sayger, the artist, and that's all you are. Typically, we have many other talents, many other things that we do or that we enjoy that if I wasn't going to, if I were you, I would say, well, if I wasn't going to be an artist, I could have been this. So do you have a hidden talent that there's something else in your life that you really do enjoy, and that, I know you said that this was the path for you, but is there anything else out there that you look at, you go, well, maybe I could have taken a stab at that?
They're so adjacent. It's probably unhealthy. I mean that. They're so adjacent. I studied art history in college, and I was encouraged to get a major, a master's, and then a doctorate in it. And I was great at it. And I remember as an undergrad, I tutored some grad students. It was so easy for me. And one of the things that made art history really easy was I know a lot of kids we had to learn a lot of paintings, right? So what you do is you stare at it all till you recognize it. Then you read the person's name, and then you read the year, and you make sure that those are wired in your head. Or if you have a background in art and you're used to being able to pick up comic books from when you're 13 and saying, that's by George Perez and that's by John Byrne, even though I've never seen them, because I've learned to recognize art styles. Art history for me was easy. I didn't memorize paintings. I just figured out how the artists worked. And then anything I saw from them, I could say, well, that one's Rembrandt, that one's Rubens, and that one's Van Dyck. And I know which they are because they paint differently. And to me, that is connoisseurship. Okay. And I think that I would probably I'm laughing because I would have some sort of ridiculous career that would allow me to lean on connoisseurship of some sort, either in art or antiques or comic books, or I sold vintage clothing in college. I could have done that. I've got this background from my family, and I just can't see it being anything else. If you want something wildly different, there's a moment where can you make money playing Ultimate Frisbee? Probably not, but I would have tried. I played until I was 44, and then that was time to quit. But I do think when I got to the point when I was about in my young 30s, if I would go to a house party or something, cocktail, and you meet people you don't know, and you're looking for an icebreaker question, I used to ask people, what's your hobby? And I don't know why this is. You'll either agree with me or you won't. But I found that a lot of people in their 20s and early 30s kind of found that an offensive, abrasive question. Instead of saying, what's your hobby? Sorry, I would say, do you have any hobbies? And there's a difference. Mm-hmm. And when if they were young, they usually kind of bristled. Of course I have hobbies. And they took it almost as a challenge. I think when I asked older people, they said, oh no, life is very complicated. You're asking me, have I found a reoccurring thing that I'm making time for outside of life obligations? Right.
Right.
And And I think hobbies, some sort of pursuit or interest or thing that you can cultivate and be something that grows and evolves with your life as an adult, is wildly important. And that's where
Extremely
I said mine is a
mentally
little bit.
healthy.
Yeah. I mean, it can be a fantasy football team. It can be your garden. It can be whatever, but something you want to be invested in. That what I did was, and I remember I did all kinds of goofy things in college and out of college. For some people would just have pizza and a beer. And I remember I said, let's have show and tell. I'm going to have adult show and tell at my house, which sounds like it's naughty. It's not. What it
Sounds
was,
amazing.
well, I told people, I said, bring something that you know a lot about that you can share with people. And you don't need to be an expert on it, but you need to be the expert in the room. And everybody I talked to said, I don't have anything like that. And almost everybody I said, yes, you do. And this is what it is. I had a friend of mine who had a bunch of pre-1980 home video game consoles, and they worked.
Oh, that's cool.
And I said, just show them to us. Tell us the story of Pong. If we'll,
oh, for sure, yeah.
Right. And then another one, a friend of mine, was this girl, and she collected vintage electric razors. She had this wild collection of electric razors from many from the 50s, but decades before and decades after. And my attitude is, if you can show it to me and you know a lot about it, you can get me interested for 10 minutes because you're so knowledgeable, and here I can handle and learn something.
For sure.
And so that was what adult show and tell turned into, was people would just show up, and everybody started out kind of embarrassed. All right, well, here's what I'm going to show you. I don't know why this is really weird, but I'm really into whatever, Victorian sheet music. But if you have someone knowledgeable and you see a lot of it, it's great. So everybody should have a hobby.
Now I want to have an adult show and tell. That sounds really cool.
Isn't that great?
No, sir, I'm 100% serious. I think that's a fantastic idea, and I think that would be so much fun, because I know friends of mine who have all these really cool collections of things, and it would just be cool. It would be really, really cool to just sit down and talk about them, and have a beverage and sit down and chat, and yeah,
I'm not fun. Almost everybody who I know who collects comics, they like action figures to some extent. I'm not a big action figure collector, but I played with them when I was little, right? And I remember I was hanging out with a guy who knew a lot about old toys. And I don't need to know every little bit of minutia about everything, but to pull together the 10 best, most interesting stories. One of the things he told me was how to tell reproduction Star Wars pistols from the little three and three-quarter figures from new ones from old ones. And I said, how do you do it? He said, they sound different. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, if you drop it on a hard surface, because the reproductions are made from a cast from the old ones, they're slightly different plastic and they're slightly different weight. They will, when they bounce, they'll sound different. And he told me, he's like, here, I'm going to bounce them, and you just shut your eyes and you tell me which is new and which is old. And I got to where I could do it.
Oh, that's cool.
That was cool. Right.
That is cool. There's just those little tidbits that you don't catch, that you wouldn't know just by knowing. It's something you have to be told or shown.
Right. And it doesn't happen over, no offense to your stream, but it really is better in person.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. 100%. That has to be done in person. I agree.
And you can invite girls. Come on.
Exactly. There you go. So if any of you young fellas watching, you want to look for a way to have an actual conversation with a girl, ta-da. There you go. Adult show and tell.
That's right.
All right. Very cool. All right, Stuart, it's time to ask you a silly question. And we started asking this because my co-host, Kathleen, she couldn't be here tonight, but she was out with her daughter, and her daughter's 5. And somebody asked her daughter this question, and we were like, well, nobody asks that of adults anymore. And we thought it was rude and that adults should be asked it. So, Stuart Sayger, what's your favorite dinosaur?
Off the top of my head, anyone that has feathers. So I have to be careful answering this. A very good friend of mine is a gentleman named Chris Herndon, and he is a very skilled illustrator. He's drawn many children's books related to dinosaurs, and he knows a lot about dinosaurs. And he was the first person I knew who was really sort of lobbying, saying, no, they're. I know we're drawing comics. We need to draw them with feathers. That was probably only about 20 years ago that he started doing that. But I know dinosaurs with feathers has caught on a lot, but he was the first guy. So I think that beyond that, I think the Triceratops is cute. I don't know why I feel that way. It's just there. It just is. I don't know. Favorite dinosaur. My mother and father-in-law own a turkey, and if you see the turkey's feet, it is a dinosaur. I can tell you that. That's a good favorite dinosaur. I think that's my one. I'll tell you one story about this that I really love. Regarding my friend who loves dinosaurs. He was at the Natural History Museum, I think in Washington, D.C. I'm trying to remember where it was. It might have been the Chicago Field Museum. Okay. And he drew the Stegosaurus that they had there. He did this great drawing of all of the vertebrae, right? And I knew that he drew a lot of dinosaurs. I had that in the back of my head. I knew he was a Bernie Wrightson fan. I was in Atlanta one year for Dragon Con, and Bernie Wrightson was there, and he was pulling out drawings that he had done just out of the flat file that he thought was going to sell. And I found a drawing for my friend of Bernie having drawn the exact same skeleton from the same position. And so I was able to get this drawing for my friend Chris, the same skeleton drawn by Bernie Wrightson. There you go. That's cool. That is one of those great moments where you talk about, having a hobby and loving the stuff. Man, that was hard to beat. That was so cool. Everybody's looking at Bernie's stuff and they're looking for Swamp Thing. And I was like, how about the Stegosaurus? And he said, oh, yeah, sure. If you want that one, sure. It was a breeze. And Bernie was very, very nice and sweet.
That's very cool. I like it.
There you go.
All right. Well, cool. All right, Stuart. Thank you for being on the show. Yeah.
Can I tell you just a few things I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely.
So a few things I want to tell you about. I'll do this pretty quickly. Let's see. I'm lining up my 2025 convention appearances list. If you go to listed behind me, stuartsayger.com, you can click on appearances and see where I'm going to be all over the country. I've added some shows for 2025 that I haven't been able to do for a long time. So I know I'm going to be back at Phoenix. I'm going to be at Motor City. I'm going to do a show in Sacramento, and we're going to have an exclusive comic for that. I've got a couple exclusives in the works. I should have a Kickstarter coming up very soon for a self-published book of mine called The Wise Old Owl. Okay. I said a lot of things about Batman. If you want to see a comic book about a street-level vigilante who is very much a self-serving fascist, and I do mean fascist, he has very strong beliefs about what you should think and do, not necessarily as heroic as you should. The Wise Old Owl is a fine criticism. Okay. That's coming. And then lastly, one last thing, and this is something that I hope you guys will take quite seriously. My wife is the director of a public arts center here in Hamilton County called Noblesville Creates. And once a year, I think this is going to be year 12, January 17th and 18th, we have an event called Comic Book in a Day. And what it is, it's a challenge for comic creators to write, draw, letter, make comic book pages in one day. It's a sprint. It's about an 8-hour long challenge. And at the end of the day, we take all the pages and everybody gets published into one book. Bob Hall has come and participated with this with us before. So did Mike DiCarlo, the inker for Batman. And we usually get about 80 artists, and you can come and participate in person in northern Indianapolis, or there's an online version for anyone who's remotely all over the country, and that's going to be on January 17th. Go to noblesvillecreates.org/comic book in a day to sign up. And you'll even get to have me judge your artwork because I'm one of the judges. How's that?
Sounds great. All right. Well, we will make sure that we put those links down in the show notes down below.
Please do.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to make sure that gets shared out there, and then we'll put the link there so they can sign up, and an informational link as well as a link to your website. So we want to make sure that people, our listeners, can go check those out. And speaking of our fine listeners, if you haven't by now, this is a good time to remind you that subscribing is the single most important thing you can do to help our show continue to grow. So please do that if you haven't already. There should be a button coming up on the screen right about now. And that is a good reminder to say, hey, click like and subscribe. And go check out Stuart Sayger's work as well. You can find him on his website. There'll be the information there for the art competition and for the comic book in a day. I want to make sure that you guys get some information on that and go participate that and go check out Stuart's work. You guys will.
Can you draw?
I cannot draw. Not even a little bit. I don't believe
that. Everybody can draw a little.
Honestly, I may be one of the most drawing challenged people you will ever meet in your life.
Well, my response to that is, I will not sing for you because I know how poorly I sing.
There you go.
When no one's around, I will sing. So there you go.
My art is so bad that I don't even draw when nobody else is around. Guys, thanks for tuning into the FSF Podcast. May the Force continue to be with you as you live long and prosper. Goodbye.
Copyright 2024 FSF Podcast. Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Podcast. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpodcast.com.